Imagine this. It is the spring of 1750. You push open the heavy door of your carriage on the Pont Neuf, Europe's most famous bridge, and the smell crashes into you like a fist. A thick, sour, living fog, horse urine steaming in the gutters, rotting fish heads and cabbage cores from Les Halles, black sewage bubbling up from every alley grate, the sharp iron tang of fresh animal blood from butchers only yards away. The noise is immediate and overwhelming, cartwheels grinding on uneven stone, fishwives screaming prices until their voices crack, vendors hawking miracle cures, beggars coughing wetly, a distant church bell clanging like a warning. You look left, a noblewoman in a towering powdered wig and rustling silk panniers glides past in a gilded sedan chair carried by sweating servants, her face painted corpse white with lead makeup, fake black beauty spots glued to her cheek like deliberate lies. You look right, a child, maybe 7 years old, barefoot, ribs like ladder rungs under filthy linen, scrabbles in the gutter for a moldy crust of bread that fell from a baker's basket, nearly crushed by the next cartwheel. This single frozen second is Paris at its absolute peak and its absolute lowest, the dazzling capital of the Western world. Visitors from London or Vienna often vomited on first arrival. They pressed scented handkerchiefs or pomanders filled with cloves and lavender to their noses, but nothing could block it completely. Parisians called it le parfum de la ville, the perfume of the city, with bitter irony. Yet this poisoned river was the only reason Paris survived. Timber rafts from the vast forests of Burgundy and Champagne floated enormous oak logs downstream, hundreds of tons every week, for new buildings, ship repairs at the arsenal, scaffolding, firewood. Grain barges from the fertile plains of Picardy, Beauce, and Champagne unloaded sack after sack of wheat, rye, barley at the Port de Grève and other quays. Without these shipments, the city would face famine in weeks. Wine boats from the Loire, Rhône, and Bordeaux valleys carried thousands of barrels of red, white, and rose for taverns, palaces, monasteries, and the growing middle-class tables. Coal barges from the mines of the north fueled the bakeries that produced the daily bread ration, the forges of blacksmiths, the first proto-factories making luxury goods. Hundreds of small skiffs, punts, and flat-bottomed ferries darted across the water like insects, carrying passengers who couldn't afford bridges, secret love letters, smuggled silk and lace, escaped convicts, spies from foreign courts. The quays were permanent chaos. Stevedores in rough wool shirts and wooden clogs shouted orders in thick Parisian argot, muscles straining as they rolled barrels down planks. Carters whipped exhausted horses pulling overloaded carts up steep ramps. Fishwives with red faces and aprons stained with scales screamed prices until their voices gave out. Fresh herrings. 2 sous a dozen. Pickpockets moved through the crowds like shadows, fingers light as air. At dusk, the water caught the dying sun and turned gold, reflecting the stone facades of the Louvre and the Institut de France with its gleaming dome. Lovers walked arm in arm along the lower quays, whispering dreams while dead fish floated past. Drownings were so common they barely made news. Drunks slipped in, overloaded ferries capsized, bodies surfaced days later bloated, pale, nibbled by river rats. The Seine gave Paris food, trade, beauty, power, and quietly took lives by the hundreds every year. It was the perfect mirror of the city itself, magnificent, essential, deadly. Chapter 2. The Lie de la Cité was the ancient heart of Paris, the original Roman island of Lutetia where the city was born. Dominating it stood Notre Dame Cathedral, one of the supreme achievements of Gothic architecture. Construction began in 1163 under Bishop Maurice de Sully and stretched almost 200 years until around 1345. The twin western towers rose 226 feet into the sky, visible from miles across the flat La de France plan, a landmark for pilgrims, merchants, armies approaching the city. The 3 enormous rose windows, north, south, and west, were masterpieces of stained glass, circular explosions of crimson, sapphire, emerald, gold, telling Bible stories in radiant color to the illiterate crowds below. Flying buttresses arched outward like giant stone fingers, supporting the immense stone vaults inside. Gargoyles and chimeras crouched on every ledge and parapet, functional rainspouts by day, legendary demon scarers by night. Inside Notre Dame, the air was cool, dark, sacred. Thousands of candles burned day and night, casting golden flickers on stone pillars. Thick clouds of incense drifted from swinging censers. Gregorian chant rose from the choir, pure, haunting, echoing off ribbed vaults that seemed impossibly light. The walls had absorbed centuries of prayer, coronation oaths, royal weddings, Te Deums for military victories, funerals draped in black velvet with slow, mournful bell tolls. Kings were anointed here with holy chrism. Queens walked aisles in silk and jewels. Common people knelt beside nobles, beggars beside merchants. For a few moments, class dissolved in shared awe. But step outside the cathedral doors and the sacred bubble shattered. The Lit de la Cité in the 1700s was still a dense medieval slum. Narrow alleys twisted between leaning half-timbered houses, upper stories jutting so far out they almost touched across the street, turning lanes into permanent twilight even at noon. Streets were unpaved or uneven cobbles, perpetually slick with mud, horse manure, rotting vegetable scraps, fish scales, chamber pot contents. People emptied night soil from upper windows with the casual shout "Gare l'eau," beware the water, and the contents splashed down on anyone unlucky enough to be below. Open gutters ran black and sluggish toward the river. Stray dogs fought over scraps, flies swarmed in black clouds, rats darted between legs. The noise was constant. Blacksmith hammers ringing, vendors yelling, cartwheels grinding, children crying, drunkards singing off-key. Despite the squalor, Notre Dame remained the spiritual, emotional, and social center of the city. Coronations drew massive processions. Royal weddings filled streets with silk and music. Easter and Christmas turned the island into a carnival. Mystery plays performed on wooden stages, bonfires blazing, shared feasts of bread and wine. Philosophers and early freethinkers whispered dangerous ideas in the shadows of the portals, risking charges of heresy. The great bells, Emmanuel, Marie, Gabriel, marked every part of daily life: matins at dawn, angelus at noon, curfew at dusk, alarms for fire or invasion. In the 1700s, Notre Dame still bridged heaven and earth, a towering sanctuary amid the stench and chaos. Later, Baron Haussmann demolished the crowding medieval houses in the 19th century, creating the wide-open parvis we know today. The devastating fire of April 15, 2019 destroyed the spire and much of the roof. But restoration work continues, proof that even stone cathedrals can rise from ashes. Chapter 3. Paris in the 1700s was defined by brutal contrasts, nowhere more visible than between its palaces and its markets. The Hôtel de Soissons, built between 1572 and 1584 for Catherine de' Medici, was a Renaissance masterpiece. Its most striking feature was the 28-meter-high astronomical column, a slender tower topped with a dome where Catherine, obsessed with prophecy and fate, consulted astrologers by candlelight, terrified for the futures of her sons who would become kings of France. By the 1700s, the palace had passed to the princes of Carignan. Inside, rooms dripping with gold leaf, walls hung with tapestries depicting classical myths, marble fireplaces roaring with oak logs even in summer. Formal gardens were pure French Renaissance, geometric parterres of clipped boxwood and lavender, bubbling fountains, shaded allées where courtiers in embroidered silk coats and powdered wigs strolled, gossiping about scandals at Versailles, quoting Voltaire, mocking Rousseau. Servants in livery swept gravel paths every hour, trimmed roses to perfection, kept the garden an oasis of order and perfume. But literally next door lay Les Halles, Paris's central food market since the 12th century, a sensory assault that never stopped. Mountains of cabbages, turnips, leeks, onions piled high in wooden stalls. Butchers hacked at cow and pig carcasses with cleavers, blood running in open gutters. Fishmongers gutted cod, eels, herrings, mackerel on blood-stained slabs, scales flying. Poultry sellers wrung necks of chickens and geese in cages, feathers drifting like snow. The ground was perpetual sludge, rotting vegetables, animal entrails, fish brine, horse manure from delivery carts, human spit and vomit. Flies swarmed in black clouds, rats darted under stalls, vendors screamed themselves hoarse, fresh eels, 2 sous a dozen. Ripe pears, sweet as honey. Housewives in aprons haggled fiercely. Thieves snatched purses in the crush of bodies. Drunks staggered at night under flickering torchlight. The stench was so overpowering that newcomers often fainted. The contrast was savage. Palace gardens of perfume and geometry versus market hell of blood, rot, and survival. On the left bank stood the Hôtel de Luynes, home to one of France's richest and most influential noble families. Classical façade with Corinthian columns and pediments. Private river quay for discreet arrivals by boat. Vast salons lit by crystal chandeliers for balls and receptions. Intimate boudoirs lined with silk damask. Libraries filled with forbidden books and Enlightenment manuscripts. Gardens bloomed with tulips imported from Holland, roses from Ottoman lands, exotic fruits grown in orangeries. These aristocratic atolls were private universes, self-contained luxury where nobles hosted the most famous salons of the age, evenings of music, philosophy, theater, where Voltaire's sharp wit sliced through superstition. Rousseau's passion attacked inequality. Diderot read drafts of the Encyclopedia aloud. Yet outside the high walls, ordinary Parisians lived 10 to a damp cellar room. Shared 1 bucket for waste, died young from disease or hunger. The gap between palace and street was not just physical, it was moral dynamite waiting for a spark. Chapter 4. Paris hid entire secret worlds inside its walls. The Temple Quarter, originally the European headquarters of the Knights Templar in the 12th century, had passed to the Knights of Malta after the Templars' brutal suppression in 1307. By the 1700s, it was a semi-autonomous enclave, exempt from most royal taxes, free from guild regulations. This status made it magnetic. Luxury craftsmen flocked here, jewelers setting diamonds and emeralds for court ladies, watchmakers assembling intricate mechanisms with Swiss precision, cabinet makers inlaying ebony and tortoiseshell with mother-of-pearl. Nobles built discreet townhouses for mistresses, gambling dens, private libraries of forbidden books. The neoclassical gateway opened onto a maze of courtyards, workshops, chapels, and hidden gardens buzzing with clandestine activity. Later, in August 1792, its ancient tower became the grim prison for Louise V, Marie Antoinette, their children, and Madame de Lamballe, the royal family's last stop before the guillotine. Napoleon ordered the entire complex demolished between 1808 and 1811 to erase any royalist shrine. Today, nothing remains. Science also flourished in Paris's quieter corners. The Paris Observatory, founded in 1667 by Louis Sive, was his bold claim that France would lead the world in knowledge. Its building was precisely aligned to cardinal directions. Its meridian line became the reference for all French maps until Greenwich took over in 1884. Giovanni Domenico Cassini discovered 4 moons of Saturn from its rooftop telescopes. Located on the southern edge of the city, away from coal smoke and city haze, it represented royal ambition at its most enlightened. Les Invalides, begun in 1670, was another rare act of royal compassion. A vast military hospital and retirement home for wounded and disabled veterans who would otherwise beg on streets. It could house up to 4,000 men in dormitories, infirmaries, workshops. They lived under strict military discipline, daily masses, work in carpentry or tailoring shops, parades on the huge esplanade. The Golden Dome, completed in 1706 by Jules Hardouin Mansart, became one of Paris's most recognizable silhouettes. Today, it houses Napoleon's tomb and the Army Museum. But no portrait of 18th century Paris is complete without Versailles, the colossal monument to royal excess just 12 miles southwest. Louis Sive transformed a simple hunting lodge into a 700-plus room megapalace between 1661 and 1715. The Hall of Mirrors, with 357 arched windows and mirrors, symbolized absolute power. Under l'Entre's gardens were geometric perfection, vast parterres, fountains that danced on command, tree-lined alleys where courtiers promenaded in finest silks. In 1682, Louis moved the entire court and government here, turning Versailles into a gilded cage. 10,000 nobles lived in apartments or attics, enduring endless rituals, the lever, kings, the coucher, meals watched by crowds, all for a chance at a royal glance or favor. Balls, operas, fireworks, hunts consumed fortunes. The cost was catastrophic. Taxes crushed peasants. Bread shortages grew. Resentment simmered. Versailles was not just a palace, it was the visible symbol of a system rotten at its core. Chapter 5. While the streets stank and the poor starved, Paris's intellectual salons burned with dangerous brilliance. Elegant drawing rooms in hotels particuliers hosted the sharpest minds of the age. Voltaire's acid wit shredded religious superstition and royal tyranny in pamphlets smuggled under cloaks. Rousseau's discourse on inequality and the social contract argued that civilization corrupted natural goodness, and that legitimate government came only from the people's will. Diderot and D'Alembert's Encyclopédie, 28 volumes published secretly, compiled all human knowledge while quietly attacking dogma, privilege, and absolute monarchy. These ideas spread through cafes, underground presses, letters, whispered conversations, reaching not just nobles but lawyers, shopkeepers, artisans, soldiers, printers. They planted seeds: reason over tradition, liberty over divine right, equality over birth, fraternity over hierarchy. By the late 1780s, France was bankrupt. Costly wars, including aid to American revolutionaries, Versailles extravagance, poor harvests, bread prices soared. Starving crowds rioted. Louis V, weak and indecisive, called the Estates General in May 1789, first time in 175 years. The Third Estate demanded real power, formed the National Assembly, swore the tennis court oath. Tensions snapped. July 13, 1789, furious mobs stormed St. Lazare prison and monastery, believing grain was hoarded while people starved. They freed prisoners, looted stores, wrecked buildings. July 14, thousands marched on the Bastille, medieval fortress prison, hated symbol of royal arbitrary power. Governor de Launay refused surrender. Negotiations collapsed. Cannons roared from Place de la Bastille. Muskets cracked. Smoke choked the air. After 4 hours of fierce fighting, the fortress fell. De Launay and guards were beheaded, heads paraded on pikes through streets. Only 7 prisoners were freed, but the Bastille's fall became the revolution's defining moment. It was demolished by November 1789. The site is now Place de la Bastille. July 14 is France's national holiday, Bastille Day. Behind every palace, every salon, every idea lay the brutal reality: cramped attics shared by 10 people, no sanitation, frequent epidemics killing thousands, children working 14-hour days, resentment boiling into rage. From this crucible of beauty and brutality emerged the modern world: libert, galet, fraternit, words that would reshape governments, human rights, and societies forever. Thank you for this long, deep journey through 18th century Paris, its splendor, its rot, its genius, its fire. If this gripped you, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which city and which era should we explore next? Your hometown might be featured soon. Until then, we'll see you in the past.